Okay, here we go. Thursday, 12th of January, 2023. I'm coming to you from Ollantaytambo, Cusco, Peru. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the news. On Sunday, January 8th, I would say that the vast majority of people in the Cusco area, certainly everybody I was talking to, we're no longer really in favor of continuing to protest. People were saying that there is no real point because it was affecting Cusco itself heavily, but not really very much the government in Lima or people in Lima. And the perception is that folks there, including the government, including, the president and Congress, basically don't care what happens in the south of Peru, which is mostly Quechua and Aymara people. And so people in Cusco were not particularly interested in continuing to protest here because they thought it's not having much effect other than to really cause economic disruption and general problems. And so it was probably time to start looking for other ways to get attention for the things that they're calling for. And I'll come back to that. But then on Monday, January 9th, protests intensified and police response really kicked up in the city of Juliaca in Puno. And 19 people were killed in a matter of hours by police. And I believe it's one police officer. And this brought the death toll to 47 since protests started in December. So that's not happy making. And in response to that, everybody all over the south of Peru said, okay, so clearly we can't afford to not protest because this is not going so great. And it just keeps escalating. So there were large mobilizations of people heading into provincial capitals and regional capitals. Think like a USA state in terms of the political organization of Peru. So reportedly somewhere around 20,000 people from more rural areas converged on the city of Cusco over the course of Tuesday the 10th, and yesterday the 11th. The marches all started out peaceful, but apparently some subset of protesters decided to go and attempt to take control of the Cusco airport as a major strategic thing. And this thing of taking airports is not a standard protest thing or what most people who have been protesting have been involved in. So the sense that a lot of people here have is that the folks who have been doing that kind of thing, as well as looting and vandalism, are infiltrators or delinquents kind of taking advantage of the situation, and not just regular citizen protesters. And people do absolutely have a constitutional right to protest here in Peru. At the same time, the president, while giving press conferences saying that she is calling for peace and for everyone to bet on dialogue, has turned up in Cusco saying things like, okay, everybody who's protesting just wants chaos and is obviously a terrorist, and that hasn't gone over well either. And the overall national government response to ongoing protests has been further military action and so forth. So things are kind of heating up, and even a lot of people who have been saying that it is potentially reasonable to wait until April of 2024 for new elections are less of that opinion now. So this is hard to explain the way that it is escalating so rapidly. It's almost as if somebody is hell-bent on driving escalations in all of this kind of stuff. So it's tough. So anyway, I'm going to read a thread that I did on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter if you like Twitter. It is, I'm Abby's Yarns there, just like I am Abby's Yarns pretty much everywhere on social media. So anyway, I'm just going to read this thread off to you real quick because I wanted to comment on what I'm seeing some in international news media. So here we go. I live in Cusco, and I grew up in Cusco, and my family and community are indigenous Cusqueños, so Quechua people. The international media seems hell-bent on saying that people who are protesting mostly just support ousted President Castillo, and that is really not what we see on the ground here. Dina Boluarte, the president, who was Castillo's vice president, in press conferences says it isn't clear what protesters want, and I don't understand how anybody who's anywhere near the south of Peru or tasked with following events here can say that. Protesters are very clear about what they want. To sum up, at this point, they want, number one, Boluarte to step down, number two, Congress to be closed, and new elections called for them as well. And in general, number three, new elections across the board as soon as possible. And overarching all of that at this point, for the government to stop killing protesters. On Monday alone, in a matter of hours, 19 were killed. So that's kind of not sitting well with people. So, yeah, on Sunday, the 8th of January, the widespread sentiment in Cusco was that there was no point in protesting here because it doesn't affect the government in Lima, and the government in Lima doesn't care what happens to people in the south. That is a long-held perspective here. After what people are calling a massacre on Monday, the 9th of January, perspectives have changed a lot, and the desire to protest, which had been waning, is massively reinvigorated. I would say that there is a large majority of protesters who clearly want peaceful protest, and a small minority of radicals who want to seize or damage infrastructure. Contrary to what is being reported in very limited English-language coverage, protesters are mostly not out supporting Castillo. He is rarely mentioned, in fact. What is being talked about a lot, on the other hand, is what people perceive as brutal police and military repression, and why that is the national approach from the national government to dealing with protests that universally began peacefully and which have escalated for reasons that are either in response to police action or due to what many say appear to be infiltrators amidst protesters. What makes no sense to many people here is that the national government claims to want dialogue but has attempted to initiate it by classifying all protesters as terrorists and by threatening further use of force. In 46 years since I first came to live in the Cusco area as a child, I have never heard so many people so overtly express the sentiment that they feel mistreated by the national government, and that includes during some very dark times of military dictatorship and rampant terrorism. Meanwhile, fake news and flagrant fake accounts on social media pushing outrageous rhetorical positions have massively stepped up in the past month. Many people here are shocked that there are not international calls for the current government to step down and call for new elections immediately. My family and community ask me many times daily what they are saying in the wealthy world because they can't believe it's nothing. I don't know if it's worse when I have to tell them it is nothing, or that they are being portrayed as ignorant and uneducated and blindly following an ousted president for no good reason, or that international coverage sometimes seems to favor the current regime. I have been trying very hard throughout this entire crisis to spread the word neutrally about what events I see and what I hear people saying. I am not trying to take a political stance, and since I am making that very concerted effort, it is hard not to see the slant in a lot of foreign news. As to domestic news, people are generally well aware of which outlets have which kind of slant, but when people in other countries who don't know a lot about the history of Peru read articles, they can't tell if they're slanted or not. They just can't tell. They don't have the background to be able to tell. Anyway, so then it becomes hard not to think that there are organized efforts to cause the whole situation here in the south of Peru to escalate. Pretty much nobody who lives here wants to see escalation, and yet that is what keeps happening, typically in response to increased use of military force, more wounded and dead civilians, more menacing statements from the government, and a spreading sense that nobody outside of Peru cares what happens to people here. Very little makes sense. I continue to believe that diplomatic solutions are possible because I know people in the South are engaged in sincere and legitimate protest and genuinely want those diplomatic solutions. Nobody wants to see themselves or their family shot or tear gassed, etc. I remain confident, like I say. Here in Cusco, where tourism is the bulk of our economy, nobody wants to see tourism damaged long term, and everyone is scared about the short term damage to an industry that was barely beginning to recover from years of COVID. And yet, you still see news coverage suggesting all that's happening is uneducated, ignorant peasants senselessly rioting because they don't know what's good for them and don't understand the issues at hand and just want Castillo back, and it is deeply perturbing, to be honest. I still don't want to be out here editorializing for lots of reasons, but I do think it's important to share what I see and hear all around me, but that I'm not seeing reflected in the news media in English. Anyway, one last thing. If you want to argue about this, go do it in your own spaces. I don't have it in me. This is about the livelihoods and well-being and futures of my family, community, and myself. And it is not easy to try to just explain the situation without editorializing. So thank you very much. I truly appreciate your time.